Hello and welcome to the webinar today on the Michigan recycling legislation proposed in 2018. We are very pleased to have you all here this afternoon to listen and learn about what's proposed in Michigan and how you can engage. We believe this is a great attempt at pro-recycling policy updates in a state in the US, and we'd love to engage as we go forward on how we can work together to make sure Michigan moves ahead. So before we launch into the webinar, there's a few technical details. I know most of you have probably been on these web meetings before, but just so you know, you can hear us, we can't hear you. That's how we planned it to help control background. If you have questions or want to send us, use the question box on the right or the chat, but please questions to make sure that those get funneled to our speakers as we have at the end. Use the control panel on the right to change your settings as we go forward. And we will have a recording of this session available after the webinar, so you can share it with colleagues and that sort of thing. So with that, we'll proceed into the substance of the webinar. So today, here's our agenda for today. We'll start with some introductions of our speakers. We'll hear about the governor's proposed Renew Michigan effort and the funding mechanism that impacts recycling. We'll hear a bit about what economic development opportunities that will create in Michigan, and then an overview of the aspects of the bill. And then we'll do a little comparison of the bill in Michigan and some best practices and leading practices used. So we'll see how that measures up. And then we will also have some time at the end for question and answer and to delve in deeper on any issues you'd like to hear more about. So here are for today. Elizabeth is representing the Carton Council, the sponsor for this webinar, and a terrific leader in this area. Angela Ayers, the Director of Strategy, will share the governor's perspective on Renew Michigan. Matt Flechter, a Recycling Market Development Specialist, will share with us a view on the economic development impacts of the bill. Karen O'Brien from the Michigan Recycling Coalition, their esteemed director, will be working here to present some of the industry relevant aspects of the bill, and I'll give a little wrap up on leading practices at the end, and I'll be moderating throughout. So Elizabeth, would you like to make some opening comments?
Sure. Thank you, Reza. Good afternoon, everyone. So as this slide shows, I'm with Tetra Pak, Director Environment and Government Affairs. And Tetra Pak, for those who don't know, our company is a packaging manufacturer. We manufacture cartons for liquid food. So, as Reza mentioned, I'm also serving as our Government Affairs Vice President for Carton Council, and I drive our policy effort for the organization. So on behalf of Carton Council, I'd like to welcome everyone in this webinar. Carton Council is very pleased actually to host this dialogue on Michigan recycling policy, and we're excited to bring all the relevant stakeholders at the table today. The goal for this session is pretty straightforward. First, we'd like to provide you a briefing on activities in Michigan to date and the provision in the proposed legislation. I think that's one of the first goals. Second piece is really to discuss other pro-recycling policy options that could support the governor's recycling goals. And the third piece is really to try to understand through this dialogue today your appetite really at the table here to work together to support the pro-recycling policy as the legislations move forward in Michigan. So with that, I suggest we move to the next speaker.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate
Angela, please. Oh.
Just wanted to say thank you to the Carton Council. This is Angela Ayers from the Governor Snyders office, and I'd like to just give an overview of the Governor's Renew Michigan proposal. So in 2012, in the Governor's Energy and Environment message, he made a call to double our state's recycling rate. So Michigan, as you'll hear throughout this presentation, is at about a 15% recycling rate. The amount of material that we recycle is pretty low, especially as you compare it to not just the Midwest states, but the national average. So as he looked at this broad charge, a couple groups, stakeholder groups convened, both focused on one on recycling and one on solid waste and sustainability, to really help come up with recommendations on how do we achieve this goal and improve our recycling rate here at Michigan. Those reports were finalized last year, and the governor took some considerable time to review those recommendations and develop a proposal that was holistic at not just how do we increase our recycling rate here in Michigan, but how do we look at the way that we manage all waste materials here in the state. So, we've done a really good job of planning for our landfill capacity, and the way that we manage our solid waste. But really, we're at an opportune time to look at how do we change that? How do we go from just planning for solid waste to planning for all materials, and what's the best and highest use of the value of those materials, and determine what the appropriate place is for those by recycling, reuse, putting those materials back into businesses that need them, especially here in Michigan, and how do we allow the environment to do that? So the proposal that the governor is offering is to look at how do we invest in those systems. Currently here in Michigan, our tipping fee or surcharge on landfills is 36 cents per ton, which is the lowest in the Great Lakes region. If you compare us to the Great Lakes states, the average is about $5.30 a ton. So we're incredibly low in the amount that we charge for our landfills. If we look at increasing that fee to match our friends at the state of Ohio at $4.75 per ton, we would generate $79 million a year. Looking at how those funds would be expended, we would prioritize how the funding that we would go to local governments to revitalize their planning process, so that they're not just managing for solid waste, but it's for sustainable materials management. So we would have funds to the state, not just to manage the landfill program today, but additional funds for those locals. In addition, we would have $15 million in new money specific to grants. Initially, the governor wanted to double the rate, but the doubling of that rate would get us to 30%, which is still below the average. And he said, I don't want to be below average. I want to shoot for tripling that rate to 45%. So in order to help facilitate that, the $15 million would go specific to grants in areas of market development, recycling infrastructure, and additional planning funds to local communities. Here in Michigan, the average household disposes of about 1 ton of waste per year. So the impact to that average household would be equivalent to the increased rate of $4.75. So in terms of looking at how can we make this plan affordable for Michigan residents, we wanted to ensure that affordability piece was part of this. And as you see, the state of Wisconsin actually charges about $13 per ton for their waste. Our friends at Ohio are $4.75, and where Michigan is at in that space, we wanted to bring us in closer alignment to the Great Lakes average. In terms of where we're at in the timing of the proposal and the legislation, the governor announced this just a few weeks ago, so we're working with our friends in the legislature to draft some bill language and look at timings for introduction. So while the bill is not yet introduced, we'll be working on that language and fine-tuning that and working with our stakeholders to move forward on this proposal yet this year.
All right, thanks, Angela. I'm gonna keep this moving along. I think there's a poll question here. Did you want to take this one?
Can we put the question up? Okay, so here you can vote and let us know your view on the proposal to fund Michigan's pro-recycling initiatives that Angela just put on the table. What do you think? We'd love to hear. So for all of you out there who are multitasking and doing other things, now would be a really good time to look at your GoToWebinar screen and vote for us. To Matt.
Yes, if you notice, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty here, so we're going to keep this rolling. I'll introduce myself. This is Matt Flechter, the Recycling Market Development Specialist at the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. And by looking at the list of people who attended, I know most of you. So hello, everyone. We wanted to take this moment to talk about the importance of recycling market development, and that the next slide, please. That something is not truly recycled until it makes its way into a new product. And that's why recycling market development is key to our success. We've heard over the past couple of decades the importance of making sure that we have end-use markets for the materials. It's not just about recycling bins at the curb. It's not just about collection and sorting the material. It's about turning those materials into new products, ideally right here in Michigan. And that's what I focus on right now. The 20 years or so of our work since we've had a updated solid waste legislation, we've watched other states pass us by, especially in market development, in the market development arena. We've seen some successful approaches working with economic development agencies, and we've seen some real opportunities. And I'm happy to report that we are making some very important strides in that direction. I keep on trying to advance the slide myself. I can't do that. Can I get the next slide? So this is all in context of the work that we have been doing for about the past 5 years, directed since we had the recycling initiative originally identify funding to allow, well, to be honest, to allow me to begin to focus on recycling market development. So we were able to hire 4 technical assistant staff that many of you know, Emily, Katie, Brian, and Elizabeth, and they are out working on the technical assistant side of things. And it's allowed me to provide focus on end-use markets. And this context really is with the governor saying that we were complacent. We haven't done enough. We're behind. We're half the national average. And that's really a driving force at this point to make sure we get funding and resources, technical assistance, and then also funding out to the communities to update the planning process, which Karen will be talking about shortly. Next slide, please. So data, some of you are numbers people. I know I like numbers people. So I want to share this information with you. And by the way, these numbers didn't come from anywhere. They came from a very detailed study that is available online. You can search Recycling Market Analysis Michigan in any search engine. I just was checking them, and it comes up in the first hits, at least on my search engine. So if you have trouble getting it, we can provide that study to you. Recycling, reuse, and recovery results in about 36,000 direct jobs in the state of Michigan, with a total annual labor income of 2.6 million. When the indirect or induced labor impacts are included, the industry has an impact of 93,000 jobs and a labor income of 5.7 billion. If the 93,000 jobs created by the industry were all in the same city, it would be the 11th largest city in the state. The direct economic output of the industry is 14.7 billion, and the total economic output is $24 billion. These are big numbers. When we talk to the legislature and other decision makers, they think of recycling too often as just a curbside bin, that they do something at home. They don't recognize the value of the industry to our economy and our environment. And that's once we start talking with these numbers and showing that the complexity of the recycling industry, that it's about policies and it's about funding, it's about making sure we have good education resources and end-use markets and a strong business climate to turn these materials into new products, you can see the light bulbs go off in their head. They say, they begin to ask really good questions like, why aren't we doing better? What can we do? And that's really where they are beginning to engage at the right level and ask the right questions so that we can move these policies forward. Next slide, please. And to reiterate, 36,000 direct jobs and 1.7% of total employment in Michigan. So it is a significant portion of Michigan's economy. Next slide, please. So what are we doing? Many of you have heard about the resource branded initiative. You can see our logo there. This is a collaboration between Michigan Economic Development Corporation and DEQ. We have heard for years, why is it that we have an economic development agency that is not connected to these important topics of sustainability and reuse of materials? And I would say they are. They do understand this. They do get these questions, but what they don't have are the technical knowledge and resources and tools to be able to talk to industry about how and why to manage resources differently. So that's where this collaboration comes in, working together with them, making sure that their district staff, they're out there working in the business community, have the tools and resources they need. So what are those tools and resources? We did a MEDC and DEQ survey of manufacturers to gain some insight, to figure out what it was that they needed. And we heard very clearly that that many industries are interested in learning more and doing more, but they didn't know how. They didn't know how to connect. And so that's why we built, based on that survey, we're developing a couple of tools. Next slide, please. And those tools include the existing, that's been recently updated, the Recycled Materials Market Directory that many of you know about, and something that we're working on right now that will be announced in the coming months, which is the Materials Marketplace. Our counterparts in Ohio and Tennessee and soon to be Minnesota have been working on developing a more interactive materials marketplace, one that connects generators and end users through the supply chain to make sure that those materials are meeting a higher and better use. And that will allow a specific tool. What I'm most interested in that is I can go to the business community, the economic development agencies, and be able to provide a specific tool and resources to get my foot in the door, to be able to talk about the importance of managing resources differently. And it's gotten a lot of attention thus far, and we're expecting even more to come from that. So stay tuned. So that is a quick update. I appreciate the time, and now I'll hand it back to you.
And I want to remind folks out there, please send your questions in so we can be sure to. With that, I'll hand it over to Karen.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening in on our webinar today as we try to talk a little bit with a little more detail about the initiative, what's happening now, and how we're moving forward, and why your support is really important for us to get this done. Next slide, please. I'm with the Michigan Recycling Coalition. I'm the executive director. For 36 years, we've been advocating for recycling issues, and most recently, in the past, 4 to 5 years, we have been a really significant stakeholder at the table because it's our intention that Michigan policy really needs to change to favor sustainable materials management, and funding has to come along with that to do it in any meaningful way. What you see in front of you right now is that, of the waste landfilled here in Michigan, which is about 17 million tons a year, a full 1/4 of that waste comes from out of state, and the most of that, 20.9%, comes from Canada. That is happening because the whole of Michigan's solid waste policies is really focused on counties securing 5.5 years of disposal capacity. Our solid waste policies have really driven the development of landfill capacity based on this disposal-based policy for 30 to 40 years. And because of the development of this disposal capacity, we have very plentiful and cheap landfill space, and we have invested in landfills and landfill expansion, and therefore we are attracting trash. In this scenario, recycling and composting really aren't competing well. And if we are going to make any strides, we need to, level the playing field to make right those kind of policy blind spots and make other materials management methodologies competitive. So you can see very much that 15%. It reflects our recycling rate, and you can see that we have the lowest recycling rate of our Great Lakes neighbors, in some cases by multiple digits. So it is clear that our policies have not put us in good standing and are really not benefiting Michigan's environment or economy in any way. Next slide, please. So when the governor made his announcement back in 2014 to double the recycling rate, which has now become a triple of the recycling rate, he established the Governor's Recycling Council, and he appointed experts to really talk about what kind of policies do we need to put in place to really grow recycling in Michigan. So at the same time that was going on, the Department of Environmental Quality pulled together this Solid Waste and Sustainability Advisory Panel. These are industry stakeholders who know Michigan solid waste law and have really been working over the past 2 to 3 years to look at that very big law and identify the weak spots, the challenges, the places we need to make it better. So the intentions have really been to update Michigan's solid waste law to be more inclusive of this broad sustainable materials management infrastructure that previously we were blind to here in Michigan because we didn't really have a way to include them. And so, the intention is these two groups ended up developing 2 sets of recommendations. Those recommendations were brought together to inform the bill that is being worked on right now that would update Part 115 Michigan Solid Waste Law. And the intention of those recommendations are really to, create that level playing field for productive material management options outside of disposal. Ensure that we've identified the funding needs, and we have local implementation of those responsibilities at the forefront. So locals through the county are defining what their needs and opportunities are and setting their goals accordingly. One of the things I think that's really important that we will be doing is promoting access and incentives to recycle by requiring counties to show progress on reaching some access goals and some utilization goals to be eligible for funding. And in addition, to DEQ overseeing these activities, DEQ will be the linchpin for organizing education and outreach activities at the state level, market development activities at the state level, and of course, providing the technical assistance and the leadership that we really need to move forward. Next slide, please. So very specifically, the proposed changes to Part 115, we saw a version of the bill back in December. Many in the industry who have been involved have put comments in about that bill. The Legislative Service Bureau is currently looking at those changes and will spit a new bill version out very soon. We hope maybe at the beginning of April if everything goes well. But we've gotten probably more consensus around the changes to this bill than we've gotten in any time in the history trying to deal with these issues. And what we're really trying to do, again, is to broaden the current planning process. So instead of requiring counties to just plan for disposals, we want them to also plan for meeting access goals, meeting recycling goals, meeting composting goals, utilization goals. And in doing so, they have to, to catalog facilities. They have to know what's happening in their communities, and they have to assure that there is the capacity to manage all the materials being produced. So the benefit of being a part of Part 115 is that if you can demonstrate a need for capacity for a composting facility, then Part 115 makes it easier to site that facility. Just like landfills are having a NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard, and are getting pushback, composting facilities and some recycling facilities are getting that pushback too. But if communities say we need this, then we will ensure that those facilities can get sited. Now, in doing that, having the benefit of Part 115, then the burden of what Part 115 is that those facilities get the oversight that any other facility covered by the DEQ would get, which means that they have to apply for permits and provide operations plans. And these are something that's very new for composting and recycling facilities. What we hope that does is give everybody kind of a base level of confidence about what these facilities are doing and how, and them being good actors in the communities they are. And of course, the planning process really is enabling locals to identify and require service provision for their residents through ordinances and through agreements with haulers or other service providers. But, an important thing that planning also does is the right of locals to limit landfill expansion and landfill development if it's not needed. But this planning process would have to be supported with funding, and that funding then would go to support program development and infrastructure development through grants. So this is some of the nitty-gritties of what this law would do, but we're really talking about enhancing the structure that we already have in place for it to do more and better. Next slide. So just to kind of reiterate, Michigan has a 15% recycling rate. Of that recycling rate, less than half is really traditional curbside collected recyclable material. The other material, container deposits, take back programs for electronics, for example, and our yard waste collection, those are very specific policies that, the organics is about a yard waste ban. We have a bottle bill in Michigan. So that 15% rate includes those, policies that drive recovery. It is clear to us in doing this work that we're really not working on is that traditionally collected curbside, recycling stuff. And that's what needs our help and assistance. And that's why it's focused on planning and it's focused on funding to assure that counties are doing the work they need to do and getting the funding to do that. Next slide. So why does this matter to you? Well, we think we've done a really good job at making a lot of people happy and at working with the system that we already have. We're not trying to enhance a producer responsibility effort or expand the bottle bill. We want to get to more materials. We're not banning materials because, frankly, we don't have the systems in place to do that. And so these are not any kind of draconian mandates. These are just simply providing services and infrastructure and leadership to get something done that's good for everybody. The current framework needs to be diversified and expanded. We need to improve the process by which the public and private sector can work together to meet the needs of Michigan residents and businesses. We're talking about 50% of the waste disposed of in Michigan is generated by residents. 25% of the waste that is generated in Michigan is generated by commercial businesses and industry, small industry. So, the weight here is really on Michigan residents, and we've already identified the cost to them. The benefit is much, much higher than $4.75. And honestly, we're trying to remove the incentive to dispose of waste with all these changes. That, I think, is the key point here. Moving materials out of households and businesses into processing centers and the market is where economic development really happens. And if we don't make strides in enhancing that and making those connections, we are losing out, and there's an opportunity cost. So, my last words here is that, we are trying to get this done by the end of the year, and we're actively working on a legislative strategy to do that. And your help is really needed to make that happen. So that's what I have. I think we have a poll question.
Please cue us up with the poll. Okay, so what we're really looking for here, does the package in Michigan represent the pro-recycling policies that you want to see move forward? So please let us know. And again, if you're multitasking, look at your GoToWebinar screen, because we want to hear what you think here. Looks like those results are coming in. That's great. Okay, we are seeing some nice alignment as these results come in, and we'll share them with you in just a few minutes. All right, well, I hope my sound is okay. Okay, we're closing the poll and moving on. So my name's Risa Domino, and I'm a senior consultant with RRS. And I'm just going to do a little comparison of how the policies proposed, the leading policies in the Carton Council policy toolkit. And I would like to encourage you all to take a look at that toolkit. Very useful, particularly for those of you local governments out there who are about to embark on the planning that was just. So you want to forward to the next slide, please? Okay, so the key policies in the Carton Council toolkit are listed on the left, and I'm just going to give a brief overview and then talk through each one of them individually. So in terms of diversion goal or mandate, the Michigan package really hits this one well. It was introduced earlier that it's tripling the existing recycling rate, and the goal that's to really drive and interest. In terms of mandatory recycling, the bill approaches that. Typically, we define mandatory recycling as some requirements of generators to recycle in terms of access. So that of universal recycling. And so the bill in Michigan is looking at approaching the issue of access to recycling by providing, ensuring that local governments plan for access for 90% of their single-family homes to, and also requiring drop-off for multifamily and other homes. So that's a good requirement, and that falls on the medium on our sort of overall rating scale. The bill also requires, in terms of hauler permitting and licensing, it allows communities to require haulers to provide recycling collection if they choose not to implement a plan on their own. So that's an alternative to the local requirement to provide curbside access. In terms of disposal bans, there are no new disposal bans in this bill, as was mentioned. The state does have a few in place already on some key materials, such as waste, which is a key part of it, part of the diversion to date, and also things like tires and some hazardous materials. The bill does not address pay-as-you-throw, which is a really important strategy I'll talk about a little more in a minute. But this is a really good one for you local governments out there who are at things you could integrate into your local solid waste management plans as you work to implement these requirements. So that's a good one to think about as you move forward to implement this legislation forward. So I'll go through each of these now in a little bit more detail. So one of the key elements of the Carton Council Policy Toolkit is universal service. And so what we find in the leading programs around the country is that the best performing programs tend to happen where trash, you also collect recyclables. Some other states have put these requirements in place. Vermont and Delaware are good examples. And it's really in terms of residential addresses through the curbside and drop-off access requirements, but also in commercial settings and in public settings, places like parks and public spaces. So again, looking at updating local solid waste management plans, this is something you might want to consider as you're moving forward. Next slide. Hauler permitting and licensing can be a really powerful tool. And again, this bill enables local governments to meet hauler permitting and licensing requirements. What it does is it gives you a tool for setting certain requirements. So for example, you could require that any hauler servicing your area provide parallel service, meaning that anywhere where they provide garbage service, they also provide recycling service. You can also integrate things like data collection and reporting. It's a really flexible and really useful tool, again, that we encourage you to look at as you launch into the local management process, and also in this bill. Next slide. Disposal bans, as mentioned, they can be a powerful tool, really as an educational tool more than a literal tool. So it's a good way to open the conversation about recycling, saying, hey, did you know that's so valuable that the state doesn't want us to throw that in the landfill, or our community wants to keep that out of the landfill. So again, there are no disposal bans in this bill per se. There are some bans in place in Michigan already. But this is something you could look at as a backstop to a good infrastructure, education, and outreach program. Next slide. So lastly, pay as you throw is a really important tool whereby municipalities or waste haulers charge residents for waste generation based either on volume. Typically, it can be done in a variety of ways. It can be done through a bag program, through a cart program, through a tag program. In all these ways, essentially, the premise is that that residents pay less if they waste less and pay more if they waste more, and recycling is provided for free. These programs have significant impact on waste reduction, and what's very interesting is that some of that increase comes from and some comes from actually waste reduction. So people tend to find reuses, they tend to donate, they tend to share, they tend to buy differently when these programs come into play. So really powerful tool can be utilized at the local level to support recycling and to finance and to waste management system. Next slide. So here you see some of those details. When you look at the amount of material reduced through pay-as-you-throw program, 40% is an increase in recycling, and a full 60% is source reduction or reuse or donation or yard waste collection. And there are a variety of different ways you can make this work. There are different systems for different communities. We have a sticker program where I live. It's very convenient. Buy the stickers at the store. If you have cart-based garbage collection, you can have variable cart fees. You can sell specific bags for collection, that sort of thing. The key is that the fees for the waste really need to be proportional to the amount of waste produced, and recycling and composting need to be paid for free. If you do those, say terrific results. Okay, so as we tee up our last poll question, I do want to share with you the results of our first two polls, and we're seeing really terrific alignment here. In the first poll, we had 65% say yes, that they support the governor's proposed funding mechanism, and 19%. So that's many of you out there, a really terrific and valuable tool. Let's go to the second question, Marissa. The results for the second question are also very promising. On this one, let's see. Oh, there it is. 6% support at least some of the proposals out in the package, and 24% support them all. So again, really good alignment that this is a package that's moving in the right direction. So as we go into the final poll question here, about engaging with us. As Elizabeth said at the beginning, we are really interested collaboratively to and the Michigan state in passing this legislation and putting this terrific policy in place. And we'd like to see if you're interested in working with us. And the results coming in are great. So we haven't gotten a lot of questions in the question box. So if you do have some questions, please be sure to submit those. Since I'm not seeing any, I'm guessing that's because you all think what we're doing is awesome. want to talk about more, or other things you want to hear about, please do feel free to pop that in the box.
Hi, this is Karen O'Brien. You know, I just wanted
Hi,
to
Karen.
give thanks, Risa did a great job. I just want to, you know, make sure the audience knows that we are looking for kind of national associations that are associated with, you know, these recycling initiatives, and even state associations, local associations that may be willing to sign on to a letter of support. This kind of letter is good for our representatives and our senators to see that it's good for business, and it's good for particular businesses. And so we'd like to, I think this question specifically was to gauge the interest in that. And I think that's the tool that we would, you know, be using to get that support.
Thanks, Karen. Any other of our speakers want to provide any close?
Hey, I'll double up on what Kieran just said. This is Matt. I think that you have a voice that needs to be heard when we're talking about the entire supply chain. So the legislature, I said this before, but I want to really make sure I hit this point. The legislature doesn't see recycling the same way we do. And I'll say that we do because you just sat on a webinar talking about this stuff. So you care about this. Being able to articulate your part of the story, your story, and how this is important to you really is important to the success of this, especially when it comes to something beyond the recycling bin, the entire supply chain, the collection, the processing, the interaction with industry, and how you need systems and policies that are not going to get in your way. They're going to create opportunities for you to thrive. Your voice matters in this, and I think that we need to make sure that we provide those opportunities for you to get in front of those decision makers to add your voice to the process.
Reza, I was wondering whether you show the third question poll, but I haven't seen, I don't know whether, or maybe I missed it, the result of the question,
Yeah, well, we were just taking those questions while we let that poll close, but here we go.
All right.
This is terrific. 83 on the line are interested in working collaboratively.
That's excellent.
Up with you on how to make that happen. Get a question in, and that question is about how this program, or the policy proposed here, would work in concert with the bottle deposit.
This is Angela.
Karen, or okay, Angela, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, I'll just start, and then for sure Karen and Matt can chime in. And again, just appreciate the opportunity to talk through the proposal and all of the detailed potential impacts that could occur. The proposal from the governor would not impact the bottle deposit law. It currently would just revise Part 115 in terms of the fee and the funds that would be expended as part of that. The details that Matt and Karen kind of went into would be some of the things that the fee would fund, which would be some of it included in statute, and some of it, you know, in the policy implementation of it. A lot of people, I think, are interested in having a conversation about, you know, how does the bottle bill fit in? I think as this proposal moves forward and is implemented, we can certainly have those policy conversations as we work towards market development, as we work towards increasing recycling, and then figure out with all of the folks that are engaged in that side of the recycling equation and to figure out how is it working, how is it not, could there be improvements, and have a thoughtful conversation over time on what that might look like.
Thank you, Angela. Does anybody want
to? Sure. This is Kieran.
Sorry.
That's okay. I think Angela said it all very well. The bottle bill is an important part of, our recycling system. Even though it started out as a litter prevention measure, it delivers, high quality material. And, there's people on both sides of the argument. What I would say about Part 115 is what Angela said, that this really doesn't have anything to do with the bottle bill. We're really trying to get to materials that are more than the 2 to 5% that could be covered by the bottle bill or are being covered by the bottle bill. I think the point to make here is that, the bottle bill enjoys really strong public support here in Michigan, and there's always conversation around expanding the bottle bill, and I think that's because there's an appetite for more recycling opportunities that just don't exist, and this is the avenue that is often expressed through. So I think that it just identifies that people want more recycling, and it's our job to deliver that.
The next question is asking about the tip fee surcharge funding mechanism and whether that will also be applied at waste to energy facilities. Angela, do you want to handle?
Yeah, happy to do that. The simplest answer is if you're being charged the fee now, that fee will apply to you. So it doesn't change any of the structure or who might not be receiving it now and could somebody else be included. It doesn't change any of that. It's just if you're currently being charged the 36 cents per ton, then the fee increase would just keep going in that certain area. So the answer would be no, it does not impact that.
There's a question about when the policy documents or bills will be made available for review.
So right now, this we just had an announcement that had some infographics and essentially like a one-page white paper that outlined what you saw on the slide. The bill drafts have not been drafted yet, so as soon as those are available, they'll be posted publicly, and we would certainly advertise and send those to anybody that would be interested in reviewing.
This is Kieran, and I'd like to just clarify that we're in a little bit of a pickle here in that with the governor's funding proposal, there would be a separate kind of budget bill that would fund this, and that is happening now. Those kind of discussions are happening now without the benefit of the policy bill, which is a separate bill that we haven't seen. So we've seen really neither a funding bill or the policy bill, but we do expect those to kind of cross paths very soon as they finish up kind of budget conversations and they begin to talk about what this policy means.
Thanks, Karen. We have a question about posted about
Sorry, Risa, can you repeat that question?
Oh, I'm sorry. A question about whether or not there is a website that folks can log into to get information about the program, or whether there's a listserv they can sign up for.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So there is a website. The easiest one is www.michigan.gov/SWRA. That's michigan.gov/SWRA. And that'll get you to a lot of the documents. And then there's another one. If you type Michigan Recycling Initiative into the search engine when you're on that page, I'm going to check this when I'm done, but that's probably the fastest way to get there. It's found under the waste pages on the Department of Environmental Quality website. So that's where we're housing all of the other documents based from the conversation. So as far as the drafts are concerned, we are asking everyone to work through the people that are on the SWRA. So Kieran O'Brien would be a good person to work through, or any of the other associations that are there, depending on who you are mainly associated with. And they would be able to get that draft to you. We want to make sure we're incorporating everybody's comments, but at the same time making sure that we're able to not or create a clear process for how to engage. And so we're asking you to go through those associations if possible. And if not, give us a call.
Yeah, and this is Kieran. If I can add, the story around the development of these initiatives really changes pretty frequently. That's, I think, the nature of, trying to move policy, trying to move funding. And so it's at events like this that you really get kind of the most up-to-date understanding and knowledge. And as soon as we have something to report, it goes out in the MRC newsletter. So you might not get the best information on a website. You will get, foundation pieces and information that you can share. But if you've got some specific questions or needs, I would say be in touch with Matt or I or anybody kind of associated with the work that's going on.
I've got a couple questions on the legislation related to the increase and legislative. If there's a sponsor, the legislative, and another tipping fee, and whether see support for that tipping fee. So I think, Angela, those are questions for you.
Sure. So if I heard you right, the question is there a bill sponsor, and what is the level of support so far? So our legislative team is working on this. It is one of the governor's priorities. He has framed it as he has his Marshall Plan for Talent that he's recently introduced, and then his Renew Michigan proposal is second in terms of the legislation and the budgetary request that he is working with the legislature on. So our team has been working on it. We've been having not just meetings with legislative leadership, but one-on-one with individual legislators in both houses and in both caucuses to educate and be able to ask questions and feel out where we are in terms of support. The good news is that we've had very positive feedback from the legislature. It is a difficult thing to ask any group that would be potentially impacted to raise money, especially when you're looking at an election year for many of the folks in the legislature. But because this is a governor's priority, there is a willingness to look at this and take it seriously. So the conversations are ongoing. And especially as we will have spring break with the legislature here in a couple of weeks. We'll see if we'll be able to get movement prior to then, or perhaps when they get back in prior to summer break. So the conversations are ongoing, and the governor himself has made it a priority as he also continues to engage with them.
Excellent. Well, that brings us right to the 2 o'clock hour. So I think we will point. I want to thank all of you for spending time on the phone with us, with you about collaborating forward, given the terrific alignment we've seen today. And I want to thank all of our speakers for participating. If your questions were not answered, I apologize that we ran out of time, but we will respond to you via email. Thank you so much, and have a great day.